Hey guys, and thanks for coming back for episode 2 of our Learning to Ride series. In this episode, we're going to be going over operational control of your motorcycle, some basic drills to get you up to that basic handling test, and then we're going to look at the licensing process and how you can get through that, because there are actually a few options. So let's start off with controlling your motorcycle. So the way that you're going to interact with your motorcycle while riding it, you've got 5 points of contact. You've got 2 hands, 2 feet, and your backside. All of those things generally have one job, except for your right hand, which sort of has 2, and your thumbs are going to be a little bit busy while you're riding as well. So let's go through all of the parts so you can get an understanding of what each of these things are going to do and what they actually do to the motorcycle. So let's start with your right hand, because that's the fun one. Your right hand has 2 jobs. That's going to be doing your front brake and your throttle. So a front brake, what that's going to do is, most front brakes these days on Lamb's bikes are hydraulic. So when you pull the lever, it's going to push fluid through all the way down to the caliper, and then the point of least resistance is the pistons. So those pistons are going to get pushed out, which clamp onto your front rotor, which is directly connected to your front wheel, which will in turn slow you down. And actually your rear brake works in the exact same way, but it is controlled by your right foot. Now the fun part about your right hand is the throttle. Throttles are very, very simple. You twist it and it makes a lot of noise, and if it's got a bit of power you're going to go forward, and that's what's fun about motorcycles. So your left hand, his main job is your clutch. Now if you know how to drive a manual car, that's a good start, but you are going to be interacting with your clutch in quite a different way. You're going to be riding it a lot more and you're going to be using it a lot more often. But we'll get back into that when we get into the drill side of things. The other thing that your left hand is also going to do is you'll find that your indicators are generally there, and you'll find that a lot of your way to interact with systems on the motorcycle are generally on your left hand as well. Your right foot is what's going to control your rear brake. Now, your front and rear brake are independent and they are used quite differently. Typically, people will tell you that it's a 70% front and 30% rear, but it's also situational. But again, we'll get into that. And lastly, your left foot. Your left foot is what's going to do your gear selection. So most motorcycles are a 5 or a 6-speed gearbox, and it's always 1 down and then 5 up or 4 up, depending on how many speed your gearbox is. What that does is when you push down and you go down to first gear, when you pull in the clutch and go up to second gear, you're skipping neutral. So neutral sits between first and second gear, and if you own a Harley Davidson, you'll often see people that are dicking around trying to get to that neutral spot, because it can be a little bit tricky to find on some bikes, but if you've got a nice crisp gearbox, you'll generally find it pretty well. So there is actually a lot going on from your body telling your motorcycle what you want it to do, from pushing your hips side to side on the seat, even pushing on the pegs through bends. It's not just pushing on the bars and going into a bend. There is a lot going on that your motorcycle is going to respond to, so the better that you understand what those inputs do, the better you're going to have a ride. All right, so we understand now what's where and what it does. So let's look at the relationships between these things. Your 2 big ones are going to be your throttle control and your clutch control. Now, you're going to hear the term a lot, roll on the throttle, and what that basically means is you gently roll on the throttle as opposed to just pinning it, because it's just going to make you a smoother transition between being off power to on power, and that's a pretty important thing. Now, the other thing you're going to hear a lot of is the bite point. Now, the bite point is the point in the clutch release where it effectively starts to disengage being a clutch and re-establish that connection between the motor and the gearbox. If you think of the clutch as when you pull it in, it is interrupting or disconnecting the drive line between the engine and the gearbox. So when you disconnect that, you've then got time to change gear, and then when you let that out, you're reconnecting that conversation effectively. Now, there is a way to finesse this, because you've got what is called riding the clutch. And what riding the clutch is when you've got power on the throttle a little bit and you're at the bite point where it's starting to engage, but you're able to put some power down, but you're able to finesse it with the clutch. Now, that's something that you're going to learn over time. You'll get better at it. It's one of those things that you just need to get muscle memory with, but understanding what it is and what you want out of it is pretty important. But what I want to do is a couple of drills, because there's a few drills that are going to help you understand both of those two things specifically. Now the first one is what we're going to do is we're going to have the motorcycle in first gear with the clutch in, and then we'll be in first gear, and all I want you to do is just very slowly let the clutch out. Now what that's going to do is while you're in gear, it's going to find that bite point. Now two things are going to happen. The first thing that's going to happen is you're going to hear the engine note change. Now that is effectively what that sound is doing, is that your revs are going to sound like they're going down a bit, because they are, because the engine is going from free spinning to starting to be engaged. Now once it starts to be engaged, it's going to start using the torque from the engine at idle to start moving the motorcycle, and that's the second thing that will happen, was you'll notice that the motorcycle will start moving. Now all I want you to do for this drill, and I'll demonstrate it right now, is just get used to where that bite point is and not stall, because what I want is for you to be able to let the clutch out, let the clutch start to engage so that you can feel the motorcycle moving, and then get rolling. And then once you're rolling, all we're going to do is re-engage the clutch and apply a little bit of front brake and come to a stop, and we're going to do that over a few times until you get used to that clutch. So here we go. Start the motorcycle in neutral. So all I'm going to do, there's nothing happening on this hand, we're not giving it any throttle at all, so my hand will stay here. So we're going to put it into first gear, and we're going to very slowly, and then that's going to go all the way up to a rolling speed. And now my clutch is all the way out, and I'm just rolling around. What you might find is that there's going to be so low, particularly if you get a little bit of a hill, that you're going to want to start giving it a little bit of clutch slip so that you can not stutter the bike, because that's not good for anybody. So one more time, I've got a bit more space now. So I've got no brake, no throttle. All we're doing is slowly letting that clutch out. So this hand's here, there's no throttle at all, and we're just slowly letting that clutch out until it's all the way out. And we're doing it slowly because you'll feel that the bike is going to want to start to stall, and this is where that finessing the clutch comes in. You can do it with no throttle, and I've got a little bit of clutch on now because I'm turning, but this is where that finessing the clutch is. The theory, all of these theories translate over to any motorcycle. So one more time, we're going to slowly let that clutch out, we're going to hear the engine drop, there it goes. We're going to start getting some power on, no throttle, and we're going to slowly let that out until we can let it all the way out and we're not stuttering. Okay, so for drill number 2, it's very similar to drill number 1, but we're going to start adding throttle. Now what we're going to do is, at that point where we start letting our clutch out and we can hear those revs start to drop off, we're going to start adding them back with the throttle. Okay, so what that's going to do is that's going to keep the revs up at a nice high spot where we are now effectively slipping the clutch, because the clutch is semi-engaged, but we're adding throttle. That's what slipping the clutch is. It's loading the clutch up and using part of the connection of those clutch plates to engage some movement, but not all of it. So yeah, let's just get straight into that one. Again, it's very similar to the first one, but we're going to be adding that throttle. So we're going to clutch in, first gear. We're going to start letting that clutch out. What I tend to do is I tend to swap to 2 fingers, because it's just what I'm used to. And we're going to add a little bit of very, very small amount of throttle, just a little bit, and we're going to add more as we let that clutch out. So we're starting to move a bit more, and we're away. So again, one more time, we're going to start letting that clutch out, and we're going to start adding that throttle. So the clutch hand is doing exactly what we did in the first drill, but we're adding the throttle here. So we're going to give it a bit of throttle. You hear those revs building. We're going to start letting that clutch out. We're starting to move, and we'll add a bit more throttle as we let the clutch out. And then front brake, clutch, stop. That is drill number 2. Okay, so drill number 3 is going to be drill number 2, but we're going to add shifting from first gear to second gear. Now the way that we're going to do that is the first part is exactly the same. We're going to let off the clutch and we're going to add that throttle, and we're going to get up to a decent rolling speed of, let's say, 10 to 15 kilometers an hour. We want to be rolling fast enough so that when we come off the throttle and on the clutch, so that we're ready to change gear, that we're not going so slow that we're going to stop. And when we are going to change gear, what we're going to do, okay, so we're assuming that because we're moving along that we're on throttle. So we've got a bit of throttle on while moving. Now the process of changing gear is to roll off the throttle, which means don't just let it go, you roll it off gently, and then as you're rolling that off, you do the opposite to when you started, so you start bringing in that clutch. Now when the clutch is all the way in and the throttle is all the way off is when we then take our gear shift, and we're going to move from the position of the middle, we're going to come up. Now from first gear to second gear, we're going to skip past neutral, because neutral sits right between first and second. Once we're into second gear, we're then going to do the exact same thing that we did when we started drill number 2, which is letting the clutch out and rolling the throttle back on. So let me show you what that looks like. So we're off the throttle, in the clutch, up the gear, out the clutch, on the throttle. So that was a little bit of a sort of slow one, and sort of to try and overdo it a bit to give you guys an idea of what it is. But it might sound quick at the moment, but when you get the hang of it, it all becomes second nature. Now we're going to go off the throttle, in the clutch, up the gear, out the clutch, on the throttle. That's a lot to get in that little short space of time. So now that we know how to get up and get moving, the other thing we want to understand is the braking system. Now, like I said, you've got your front brake here and you've got your rear brake down here. Now, if you've got mid controls or rear sets, it's right in front of wherever your right foot is. Okay, it's very rare that it's not there. Now, typically, people will tell you that it's 70% using your front brake and 30% using your rear brake. Now, if you imagine that you're cruising along at 100 kilometers an hour and you decide that you want to come to a stop for a set of traffic lights, yes, that's entirely true. You're going to do the majority of you losing your speed by bringing in your front brake, and then you're going to use your back brake just to complement that a little bit. Now, where that's not entirely true is when you're using your rear brake for stability, because the way that the physics works with motorcycles is that if you have your rear brake on when you're doing, for example, a low speed turn, it's going to be putting pressure on the rear end of the motorcycle whilst you're trying to push it forward, which actually keeps it upright. So I'm going to show you one of those drills as well. That's another one of the drills we're going to do, is low speed turning using the rear brake. But for the most part, when it comes to your braking, if you're going in a straight line and you're upright, you can pull on heaps of the front brake, 80 to 90%, even sometimes 100%. Don't even use your rear brake. But this is one of those things that you're going to learn as you work out how your motorcycle works and how you like to ride. Now, for me, most of the time, particularly because I'm on a cruiser motorcycle, I'm not the kind of rider who's going to heavy brake and then hoon through a corner. I'm very much just cruisy all the time. So most of my speed scrubbing is done purely with the front brake, and then my rear brake is much more used when I'm doing low speed maneuvers and tight turns at low speed. Things like roundabouts and things like that, where you're trying to carry a little bit of speed. But yeah, I mean, it's some of it is going to be relative to personal choice, and some of it is going to be a safety thing. For example, you would not, if you're leaning into a bend and you come across gravel, for example, the absolute last thing you want to do is make your front wheel have less traction. And now, if you start grabbing a whole handful of front brake, you're adding more weight and more friction to your contact patch, which is ultimately could be that last couple of % extra that decides to let go. So it's good to understand what the physics are that are happening on your motorcycle to understand when it's good to use your front brake or your rear brake or both. Now, the next drill that I want to go over is your very low speed maneuvering, i.e. tight turns. This is something that's going to be in the basic handling course, so it's important that you understand it. What we're going to do is we're going to come to a very, very low speed and we're going to do a U-turn just up here. Now what that means is we're going to turn the handlebars full lock, or as close to it as possible. We're going to keep the clutch slipping and we're going to keep some revs on, and we're going to be dragging the rear brake. Now that sounds like a lot, but let me break it down and explain all of these things. The reason that we're going to be using the rear brake is because we want to have that friction in the rear of the motorcycle for stability. The reason that we're going to be slipping the clutch is because when an engine is spinning, it creates a gravitational force. If the engine is spinning at a higher RPM, it's going to create more gravitational force. That gravitational force, you think about when you see the science teachers and they spin a wheel and then they turn it and then the wheel does this, you know, all that sort of thing. It's those same principles that are being applied to what's happening in your engine that are going to help you with your low speed stability, because you've got these gravitational forces happening on your motorcycle. And the reason that we're going to go as tight as possible, you don't have to, but what you want to ideally be able to do to be very happy with your U-turns or whatever it is you want to be doing, is the ability to be able to do a full lock turn at next to no speed without putting your feet down. This is something that will be in your CBTA learner to restricted for sure, and if you put your foot down you will lose points for that. So this is something that's definitely worth practicing. Right, okay, so the maneuver is full lock, slipping the clutch. Now if you've got a rev counter, this helps to give you an idea. I'd say around 2,000 to 3,000 RPM. A little bit of back brake. Now you're going to figure out for yourself if you're using too much, because if you're not using any, the bike's going to go away from you, and if you're using too much, the bike's going to stop. So you want to be smooth with that rear brake, which is, if you're not used to using a foot rear brake, it's one of those things where you finesse and you get better at it over time. Now actually one of the most important things that we're going to be using to keep our stability is our heads, and the reason that we're going to use our head is because where you look is where you go. Okay, so if you're wanting to go behind you, you need to look behind you. So let's go through that drill. I'll try and do it as slow as I can, and we'll do a few of them, and let's just go over that. Okay, so we're in first gear. We're going to apply the rear brake and pull in the clutch, bring those revs up, and we're going to turn with full lock, more or less. So let's do that again. So we're going to have a bit of speed on, start to bring the clutch in and slip that clutch, brake on so that we're not running away, head, and then the clutch out all the way. And that's how you do a U-turn. Now in your basic handling test, they will do that as a figure 8. So let's just do that for the sake of it. So we'll go to the right first, as we were. So clutch, slipping, revs, rear brake, and we're looking where we want to be, and then we're going to go out again and we're going to go to the other side. Now if you've got big wide handlebars like me, this actually makes it both easier and harder because you've got more control, but your arms are so far apart. See, now I've let my revs go a little bit there, but the other thing I'm also doing is I'm sort of sitting up high on my seat, a little bit on the outside, because the bike's starting to lean in, so my right butt cheek is very much on the right hand side of my seat, and then as we turn the other way I'm going to do the same thing to the other direction. And if you ever watch those American motorcycle police doing this sort of thing at high speed and you look at the way that they manipulate their motorcycles, it's very impressive. And they are using the exact same principles, which is why you should use them too, because they know what they're doing. So yeah, that I think should be about enough to get you through your basic handling. Back to the studio at TSS. Now that you've got an understanding of how to control your motorcycle, you're probably ready for your basic handling course. Now, if you don't own a motorcycle, most places such as Past Masters that I went with will rent you a motorcycle and they will give you some training before you actually go through the test. A lot of the time they'll combine the two, the training and the test, which is super helpful if you've never ridden before, and they will go over basically what we've just been over here, and then they'll put you through the test. The test itself is relatively straightforward. It's an oval course and it's going to look at, can you control low speed tight turns, medium speed tight turns, stopping, starting, and taking off from an intersection. Those are the basic safety things that they're going to look at and say, are you physically able to control your motorcycle through these situations, and are you doing it in a safe way? And if you can display to them that you can do that, they will then issue you your basic handling certificate, which then says, we approve this person to be in a safe control of a learner motorcycle. And then you can take that through to the AA and go and apply for your learner's permit. And on that, there is a 35 question multiple guess, and there is some really great training resources online for that. You've got drivingtest.nz, and I'll link all of the resources below. But drivingtest.nz is a really great way to go through all of the questions. If you get it wrong, it tells you straight away. Just keep going back until you've got it in your head. You don't really need a row code anymore. And if you've already got your license, you probably know a lot of it anyway, but there is no harm in having a refresher. So now that you've got your learner's permit, it's probably good to understand the two ways that you can go about this. Now, the first and the most simple way is to just go through the AA, do your 6 months on your learners, go do your test, get you restricted for 18 months, and then do your other test, and then you've got your full license. That's an absolutely fine way of doing it if that's what you want to do. But what I would suggest is to go through the Ride Forever training course and do your CBTA, which is competency-based training assessment, which is a much more in-depth and hands-on way of the trainer will actually take you out for a ride, and they'll ride behind you and they'll tell you what they expect, and the testing is much more intense, but it makes you a much better rider. So if you go the CBTA route, it actually saves you a lot of time as well anyway, because you can go from getting your learner's permit and the very next day you can go and do your bronze course, which is one of the Ride Forever courses. The bronze courses, well actually all of the Ride Forever courses are really a good thing to do because it's a $20 course, it's a full day, and you're with a training officer and you're going to be with other people that are at the same skill level as you. So the way that works is your learner permit is when you do your bronze. Once you've got your restricted, you do your silver, and then once you've got your full license, you go ahead and do your gold. And there are even more further on down the track than that. So your bronze course, which again is a full day course, is going to hopefully give you the skill set to pass your CBTA. Now that CBTA is much more in depth, as I said, than going to the AA and just having one of their riders following you around and make sure that you know when to indicate. The bronze course is going to teach you so much more in depth in terms of road positioning, road awareness, and overall it's just going to make you a much better rider. I've done the bronze course and I learnt so much from that, even though I've got a lot of experience already. So the bigger picture of that is that you've now got, let's for example's sake say that you did it in the quickest time possible. You could have yesterday gone and done your basic handling and picked up your learner's permit. Today you could be doing your bronze course, and then tomorrow you could already be on your restricted license. Now you can condense that time down to basically one day and do your entire licensing process in 1 year. Now if you've got the skill set and the competency to do that, have at it. I actually waited a couple of months to go and do my bronze course just to get my chops up and have that confidence, because that confidence does make a huge difference. The way that works is once you've got your restricted license, you can then go and sign up for your silver course. Once you've done your silver course, and assuming that the instructor's happy with your performance, you can go and book your next CBTA. You can do that 9 months after you've been on your restricted license. Now, the way that works is a little bit interesting because you can pass your CBTA, for example, say 10 months after you've been on your restricted, but you can't actually get your full license until that full 12-month term. And as soon as that full 12-month term has passed, you can take your CBTA that you've passed and go into the AA test centre and say, I've passed this, please may I have my full license, and they'll give it to you there and then. And then you are a fully licensed rider. Now there is some cost involved. CBTA is a little bit on the expensive side, but I still again do recommend it. Each of your CBTAs will be around the $500 mark depending on who you go to. I've gone through Past Masters for mine and I completely recommend them. They are hugely welcoming in terms of questions. They know that you're learning, they know that your brain is a sponge and you want to know everything, and they're really supportive of that. So I had a really good experience with them. And the Ride Forever courses, as I said, also once you've got your full license, you can then carry on further down the track. Maybe you want to go into touring, maybe you want to go into road racing, whatever it is, they have a course for it, and they're all really good courses. So hopefully now that we've got all the way through this, you've got a good understanding and command of your motorcycle, you've passed your basic handling test, and you've got your learner license. Now, before you head out on the road, I want you to watch episode 3, which in the next episode, we're going to head upstairs here at TSS and we're going to go over the gear, because gear is super important, particularly your helmet, and also, we're going to go through the types of gear of what's going to be relative to you for your style of riding. Maybe you're doing city riding, so you want a nice cool leather jacket, or you're going to do some adventure riding, so you want your big textiles with all the pockets and vents, or maybe you're going to go full gimp suit because you decided to buy a little sports bike. No judgment, you get whatever is right for you, and that's what we're going to look at in episode 3. And we'll go over costings and stuff like that as well. So hey, thanks very much for watching this. I hope you've enjoyed it, I hope you've learned something from it. Now, if you know someone who's learning to ride or has made indication that they're keen to learn to ride, please share this with them, because there is a lot of information that still needs to get out that a lot of people don't actually know around the LAM system, what kind of bikes you can get, and how the actual licensing program works, particularly with the CBTA and the amount of time that you can save, and of course the extra learning that's going to come with that. So yeah, if you're not already, get subscribed, hit that like button. Comments and questions always help us out. It's all about beating that algorithm and getting more eyeballs on what we do. And yeah, thanks for watching, and we will see you on episode 3, where we're going to be upstairs here at TSS going over gear.